Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the sports-loving Teos Abadia. I noted your shirt. Unfortunately, sad news for the Colombian World Cup women's soccer team.
Yeah, they were amazing though. I so enjoyed watching this team. So I'm celebrating them even after that loss. Very proud of how far we went. We went down to England, which, as we all know, should be punished for all of their past sins and not allowed to win anymore. But somehow they got in an extra goal, and we have to honor that. But no, I'm kidding. They played really well too. It was a great game. Loved it. Loved everything about the Colombian women's games. They were just fantastic. If folks listening, especially Mike Shea, have not watched a women's soccer game recently, treat yourself to that because it's incredible how good that game has become. Like it is so different than it was a while back. It's a really clean, beautiful, powerful sport. Really fantastic. I loved every bit I watched.
Yeah. Yeah, in the US, we've been seeing over the years the sport grow in popularity, and it's just exploding and exploding. And now that Messi is playing in the US, we're only seeing it more. So still though, I prefer role-playing games. So maybe we should talk about that.
I concede this.
I know, just this once. So, speaking of things that have been growing in popularity over the years, we have D&D and role-playing games here, and we also have listeners who love to ask us questions, and we love to answer them. So let's get to our first listener corner question. This comes from Rory, the Dungeon Master Pastor via Mastodon. Ooh, that's a tongue twister.
Mhm.
Looking ahead to the DM's workshop part of the Dungeon Master's Guide, what changes would you make to create a super light version of D&D? Multiple times I found myself hanging out with a group of folks who are interested to try playing, but we don't have much in the way of materials. How could you get to the game to the table with as few materials and as little prep as possible? What would it take to make it possible to go on the spur of the moment and be playing in 10 to 15 minutes? Perfect time for this question for me. Unfortunately, I have an NDA in place that I can't really talk about it, but let's say I am smack dab in the middle of something along these lines. So I have been thinking and working in this space for quite a while up till now. So hopefully in a few months, I will be able to talk about this in super great detail. Here are some
Ooh.
questions, though, that this question spawned. What experience do you envision the players having? That's the first question. We know what a regular D&D game is. What experiences of that do you want to highlight? You can't have everything because otherwise you need the full rules for that. But what do you envision? And what do you think would be fun for these players? Okay, that's one way of looking at it from the experience side. The next question is what makes D&D D&D? What could such a game do without from D&D, and what must this game include to still be called D&D even though you're playing it more quickly and it's a lighter version? If you can start by answering those two questions, one on the end experience side, one on the sort of brand side, then you meld those two things together, and now you can start building that game. I wish I could go into more detail because I could talk about this for a whole show,
That sounds
but I
fun. I
can't
bet you
talk about
could.
this for a whole show.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what you've got cooking. On my end, what I would probably do is do what I did back a while back when I heard that 5e was being created. I played OD&D, and
Mm-hmm.
playing that, which I mean, if you look at the old rules, are just it's such a simple thing, right? And if you go down to that level of
Mm-hmm.
simplicity and play and see what it provides and what it's lacking, right? Like, what does it feel like when every weapon, everything does d6 damage that the players can muster? I guess aside from spells, maybe I'm not even sure if there's some spells that do otherwise, but by and large, everything is a D6, right? Every weapon for sure. Um, what does that do to the game? What's it missing? And so what do you need to add back in, right? Like, can you avoid weapon lists? Can you avoid feats? Can all those things, right? Can you just go for a few levels? Can you have every level be essentially meaningless? Is that okay? So the more you can ask those types of questions, the more that you can ascertain what has to be added or not added. But that's probably what I do. I'd go back and play that and reduce that. And in terms of something that might be an option in a DMG, what you might be looking at is a laundry list of things that DMs can remove. And again, like, whether that would be something that's palatable to the DM that's reading that. Will the DM go like, yeah, okay, that's great. I'm excited to try this, because if it isn't, then what's the point of that optional rule? But you'd have to kind of do that. When I look at OSR games, some of them feel like basic D&D, various editions of them, this set, that set. Some of them feel like another game that is like that, but different. And that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing depending on the game, right? But they are often just they're a thing, but they're not necessarily, like you said, what is D&D, right? That is the crux of the question when you are the actual company having to make that light experience. How do you capture that still feeling that way? And that's tough.
Right. And part of the problem is DMs. And I speak as one of those problems, because we who have played the full version of D&D know how great it is and know how cool it is. And we want to show all of that off when we teach the game. And oftentimes by trying to do that, we do a disservice to both the players that we're trying to teach and the game itself by not accepting those limitations and just delivering a cool experience that can then be built upon later if the players want to go to a larger, longer, more complex rule set.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Great question, though. Next, we have Synthetic 20 via YouTube. I've been working on my game and questioning a lot of base assumptions about game design. Good for you. So here's a question for the next listener corner. What do you think works better in TTRPGs, a leveling system with standard progression, or an experience buying system where each player can customize their character? Or maybe for whom do these systems work better for? Always interested in hearing your collective wisdom. Well, not intelligence, wisdom. There's a difference. So this is just my opinion, but I honestly think leveling is D&D's secret weapon. I think that it delivers something to the players in a satisfying way that keeps people who might try other games and who might even like other games coming back to D&D, because I don't think other games handle that leveling progression, that increase in power and scope of power and scope of play like D&D does. Now, it's not something that I care for personally myself. I'm not like, ooh, I can't wait to level up to get this new cool thing. But I have played so much, DM so much, that I recognize what it means for other people. So I know of that appeal. And for that reason, I think the leveling system with the standard progression works best for a majority of the players. For players who are more casual, it gives you what you get. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to do any major math in your head. You're just like, oh, I'm a rogue. I'm level 3. Now I'm level 4. Oh, what do I get? Oh, good. That's what I get. Fill it in. You're ready to go. You might think that for more gamist players, for more like power gamer type players, that this other system of having a number of points and then reading through a bunch of options would be better. And sometimes it is. But I think what the standardization does is it allows even those gamist players to work through permutations more quickly in their head, saying, okay, I know that if I go from level 6 to level 7 in rogue, this is what I get. I know that if I take a level of fighter, this is what I get. So it allows those computations to be made more efficiently, and you know what you're getting, so you can just figure that out. What do you think, Teos?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, games like Shadowrun, where you spend some amount of, karma or points or whatever, and then you can, level up specifically your sword fighting or your shooting or whatever. Those are in some ways satisfying because you can really focus on the things you want to do well. But usually the game then has to struggle to balance out those things because we can't have you just be the world's best person at, samurai sword. So we have to do something like an increasing point cost as you go up or whatever. And so it just can become harder and harder to keep balanced. And usually what the optimization ends up hinging on is less on that, I got it to rank 10, but more something else that adds to that or plays off of that, which becomes really hard to control. So the rest of the game outside of those things. So games like Legend of the Five Rings has historically super struggled with the difference between not just your rings and your skill ranks, but then some feat, some school option, some training that then multiplies everything absurdly and becomes just completely broken. And those things become really hard because it sort of locks in the flavor of everything else you can do and makes it hard. The level system is nice because both player, designer, game master, all of it can sort of count on this sort of, the level being a level and play off of that more accurately, I think. So it's a little easier. Now, I think if the game is super simple, that's where point buy could be more sensible, right? Like if your game has so few options that it's not really ever going to be broken, then choosing whether you want to be good at, swords or talking could be great because it's a simple game that doesn't ever
Mhm.
reach broken levels, then that could be fine. That could in fact could be very satisfying.
Yeah, there are certain games, like you say, like the Gumshoe system, I think,
Yeah.
has that sort of progression. And it works in that system because the system is different than
Yeah.
a D20 kind of system. All right, let's get to then John Peterson, who comes in via our Patreon. It's three questions, which we will take in order. I've been going through your back catalog of episodes and came across a series on creating stronger starts in the hardcover adventures. The first adventure you cover, not surprisingly, is Lost Mines of Phandelver. With Phandelver and Below incorporating Lost Mines into the book, do you think we'll see edits of the now 9-year-old starter adventure, or do you think we'll just get a copy and paste from Wizards? So I don't know. I have not seen any previews. If there are previews out there, I could be totally wrong. I would. Have you seen any previews?
No.
Okay. So I assume then that Phandelver and Below will push the timeline forward. If I was designing it, that's what I would do. So that people who have played previous iterations of Phandalin and that surrounding area could feel a sense of forward momentum. And in fact, I'd be surprised if the source book adventure didn't explicitly say, hey, in this is what happens if you want to go back and play that, assuming that it's available. Here's how you can incorporate it into this. But I'm not there. I don't know all the business cases or all of the business knowledge or design decisions that were made, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's a hard question because some of it is just timing effort, right? And you know, the author was someone who was ex Wizards of the Coast, and Rich, what's his last name?
Rich Baker.
Baker, and so they could, I guess, contract Rich again, or someone could add to what Rich did. But it would be a lot of work to redo that, and even if you just start polishing, boy, you could burn some hours, and I'm sure I would.
Mhm.
I'm the kind of person who would say, "Oh, I'll just give it a few touch up bits here," and then I would spend weeks on it. And I think everybody's probably really busy, so I wouldn't be shocked if it was just like, here's the same adventure because on one hand you can sort of say like, look, we didn't stop printing it, right? Like we kind of, here it is. But then maybe add some things to it or speak to it in some way, or that the new content plays off of it and revisits it. And as Shawn, as you said, some way to maybe like play it but in a new era or something like that, or tie it better to those whatever's coming as new could make sense. But I would kind of guess a copy
Yeah.
paste. We'll see.
Yeah. One of the coolest things from old D&D that I remember was The Village of Hamlet was its own adventure. Many players in the AD&D days started out with that as their first adventure or an intro adventure. And it promised the Temple of Elemental Evil. And we waited and we waited and we waited. And finally, after I don't even know how many years, it came. And it re-included the Village of Hamlet. And there were tweaks, there were changes. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And then for third edition, Monty Cook made Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil, which turned everything on its head a little bit, right? You went back to the moat house and all of these cool things that you didn't realize were there the first time were now there, right? There's this monolith beneath the pool with the giant crab in it. And it was just like, oh, this is so cool. Now they probably don't have the time to do something like that, but if they did, that would be like, that would be amazing.
It would be cool.
That's the best case scenario, and I'm not expecting that.
No.
The next question is artist Greg Rakowski has been in the news recently for his ongoing fight with open source AI art generator Stable Diffusion and its community that refuses to let his work go. As a DM who intends to publish soon, but is always looking for free to use art in the meantime, do you have any good free art resources to recommend? I don't. I've always worked for people, and we always have an art director and artists that we use. So I'm going to defer to Teos here.
Yeah, I didn't pull things together, but maybe I'll add some links in the show notes after this. But there are a couple of good things. One comes to mind is James Introcaso on his World Builder blog. He had an article on creating for the DMs Guild, as did Justice Armand, and I believe in both of those articles they list a number of free art sources that you can turn to. There are a ton. There are also a lot of very low-cost stock art that is cheap. If you go on Drive-Thru RPG, you'll find all kinds of sources where you're paying $1 for the art. The key to stock art or free art, and I should also say that you can go to various websites that provide stock art that are often subscription-based. You really can sign up for just a month, and you can usually use some number of items. It's often pretty big, like 100 or something like that, and then you can cancel your subscription. So those kinds of ways. There are lots of ways to have a very, very low art budget. The key to these things is that you are not commissioning exactly what you want. So you either have to go with things that you like and put those things into your book or adventure or whatever it is that you're creating, or just deal with the fact that the art is somewhat representative and attention getting rather than being an exact reproduction, right? I mean, Wizards, Ghostfire, they can say this page is dealing with this subject. Let's commission someone to create this. All right, that's what we also did for Forge of Foes, like commission the exact art for the topic. You can't do that with stock art. You're not going to find exactly what you want. And so you kind of have to change your approach to art to suit that style. But you will have really, really low costs, and that's amazing.
And finally, John says, love the podcast and appreciate the wisdom/intelligence y'all have to share. Playing my first organized play games this weekend with Baldman Games at Gen Con Online. And I don't think I've taken the plunge I would not have taken the plunge without your great conversations with the Adventures League and the Baldman folks. Well, I'm glad. I hope it went well. Let us know how it went. Baldman Games runs a great show, either online or in person. Generally very good DMs and great experiences. So we'd love to hear how that went. Next, we have John Hume via Mastodon, who says, just listen to the Mastering Dungeons episode on downtime in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Shawn mentioned spending multiple consecutive Acquisitions Incorporated adventure sessions on, quote, downtime activities, which had me wondering at what point it's no longer downtime and now just a different game mode or a different game. I've always thought of downtime as stuff done out of session or in odd little, maybe one-on-one sub-sessions. And so I'm going to real quick, what I did was not what the adventure expects you to do, right? What I did was use downtime as a springboard for larger, sometimes for larger adventures. Sometimes it was just, okay, you're going to try to spread rumors, boom, spread your, roll the die, get your results. All right, here's what happens. However, sometimes I decided to use these downtime as a link to something outside of that of the book adventure, to running something that I just wanted to run off the cuff for many reasons, to make it a more tailored story for my group, but also to get more practice at like DMing on the fly and running things off the cuff. So that was a choice on my part. Now I'm going to let Teos finish this
No,
thought.
yeah, that's great. And I was going to say sort of something similar, which is that to be clear, in the Acquisitions Incorporated adventure, downtime occurs in a regular cadence. So you kind of do the chapter worth of adventure, all kinds of things happen, and at the end of whatever session that is, where you reach this kind of conclusion to the chapter, which has a story beat conclusion feel, now downtime is suggested. So you, the DM, can run those sessions and go around the table and say, hey, you've got these various plot hooks, you've got these various character goals. What do you each want to do? Because you have some time now. And so that's the kind of idea that you have there, right? You know, the mayor grants you ownership of ruins. What do you want to do with those ruins, right? And everyone gets to decide, and a couple people might work together. So the ranger might say, you know, I want to train a beast that I rescued. The wizard wants to research the artifact that they think the enemy has. And two, the rest of the people maybe want to work on restoring the ruins. And so what's nice about doing it not as the question asked, you know, out of session or in a sub session with just one player, is that by doing it there at the table, everybody's really invested in what's happening. You're seeing that play out. You're very aware of the story. It's not a thing that maybe someone's going to tell you secondhand later or see in an email. It's happening right there at the table. And even if you don't participate, you're enjoying it. And a lot of times, downtime scenes are pretty kind of nice and story rich, but can be pretty focused. So they're a nice little bit that tells you about the world too, right? Like I like to do things like if you say I want to do pit fighting, I won't just say make 3 checks to see how you did in the ring. I will describe the ring. I'll describe the place that you go to and you know what that area of town is like and who's attending, and I'll probably drop some NPCs in there that you'll get to know. And so that's of interest to everybody at the table to understand what the world is like, what those NPCs are like. And of course, there is the how did you do in the ring part, but that's woven into everything, right? And because what's cool is not only do you win or succeed in the ring, but you're going to also come out of it with hopefully some neat information you share with the rest of the group. Now, everybody's seen it right there at the table, but that kind of makes you feel good that, you know, I went into the ring and I won or I lost, but hey, I've got a potential ally or I've learned of a villain or something like that. And that's usually pretty cool.
For sure.
And it's
So
worth
that was our
saying,
final question. Oh,
yeah, I was just going to very
go
quickly
ahead.
say that, you know, there are real mini games and you can certainly turn it into if you want to, but you don't need to do that, you know, kind of either as the adventure stands or as downtime is written. That's a choice you get to make.
Mhm. We're going to stop our questions there because we have a lot of news to get to this week. So here we go with our news. Starting off, Hasbro's Q2 earnings report was released, and D&D in particular was discussed. Teos did a deep dive into this, so I am going to sit back and enjoy the ride.
All right, here we go. The short version is that Hasbro is down overall, and they note that D&D is growing, though it seems like they're being specific around D&D Beyond. So there's a big kind of caution there. They confirmed that the movie lost money, E1 is now sold, and they see Baldur's Gate 3 as a big deal. So hopefully that's very interesting, and we'll get into some details here as quickly as we can. Hasbro lost in Q2 $235 million. Their revenue of $1.2 billion is down 10% compared to last year. Their operating profit of $137 million is down 43% versus last year. Not good at all, including a loss of $25 million for the D&D Honor Among Thieves film. They said, quote, "The movie is among the best reviewed films of 2023 and has performed well in streaming, but the box office didn't meet expectations." Year-to-date revenue, $2.2 billion, and that is down 12% from last year. So, that's all bad news for investors, which they, of course, try to pretty up when they can, as any company does. Um, the Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segment is a unit. And for that unit, they say the revenues are down 11%, mostly due to one fewer Magic the Gathering set, which is sort of, I wondered to what extent this is like them trying to counter that story that was written, I think it was last year, saying like too many Magic cards. Like, are they just trying to say, like, see, if we'd had one more set? But that
Mhm.
was their main explanation. They have a profit of 142 million, which is about 2/3 of what it was a year ago. The operating margin is also down 53%, 53.7% from last year. They said the decline in tabletop was partially offset by 33% growth in digital gaming, including the addition of D&D Beyond, which we acquired last May, and growth in Arena. And it's always hard for us on the RPG side to go, oh, look, you just lumped together D&D Beyond and Magic the Gathering Arena. Like, any
Mhm.
who knows how different they are, right? You've pointed this out in the past too, Shawn. So it's really hard to know. They said 74% Q2 growth in D&D, presumably from D&D Beyond. Hard to know. They also said they generated 2 million new registered users on D&D Beyond, but those aren't necessarily paying subscribers, so it's hard to say. Um, they did say point of sales, meaning store sales, have grown for D&D and Magic. Hasbro Pulse, which is their direct sales website, grew by 54%, but that's about 100 to 200 million dollars in revenue. They expect a strong second half of the year, in part due to the release of the Baldur's Gate 3 video game. They did also confirm that they sold about 85% of E1, which was their entertainment arm that we've often discussed on the show, to Lionsgate for 500 million. Hasbro paid $4 billion in 2019, right? Just 4 years ago to purchase it. They did sell some parts off like at the very beginning, and they're keeping some of it, but 500 million just can't be pretty overall on how that looks to go from 4 billion to 500 million, even if you had several other sales and are keeping some parts.
Mhm.
Now this is the part that gets, always so interesting, right? They are keeping a department called Hasbro Entertainment, or maybe even building it, to develop, finance, and produce entertainment based on Hasbro brands. So it's a team that's continue to work on the Transformers 1 animated film and the D&D live action television series, both with their partners at Paramount. They said that the movie releases did drive both Transformers and Dungeons and Dragons sales. Um, and then there's some really interesting things, Shawn, that came to light around this discussion of Baldur's Gate 3. And this often came in the context
Mhm.
of what they said in the past, which was things like we're going to monetize D&D, or D&D is going to be a billion-dollar brand, or any number of these things. And you're like, oh, really? Cool. Tell me how. So this is
Mhm.
CEO Chris Cox said the following, quote, when you look at a game like Baldur's Gate 3, I view that as a block, the equivalent of a blockbuster movie release. Just to put in perspective, we think Baldur's Gate 3 has the potential to be a game of the year contender. It will engage millions of highly targeted fans and be highly accretive to the D&D brand. And just to kind of put it in financial perspective, here's the good part. We will likely make more money on Baldur's Gate 3 than we have made on all of our film licensing for the last 5 to 10 years combined.
Mhm.
And I think he means Hasbro
Yeah.
film
Let
licensing.
that
So that's
sink in.
that's
Mhm.
big. So it's not only a great brand win, it's a great financial win for us, and I think it's a heavy focus of the company moving forward. We purposely stated in this release that we're a leading toy and game company. It's it's really fascinating, Shawn, because uh, on one hand, okay, that's great news, but they also cut back on a whole bunch of video games projects that we're doing, right? So when one succeeds,
Mhm.
it's enormous, but they can also fail and require a lot of expensive investment. So, um,
Right. And notice the one that did succeed was one that wasn't a Wizards of the
Hmm.
Coast, right? Subsidiary, right? It wasn't Took, it
Right.
was Larian, who is a proven winner in terms of game design.
Yeah.
So all of that needs to be balanced out. But yeah, just
Yeah.
we tend to think that movies are the big thing, right? Studio films and theaters. And that shows you where video games are right now in relation to especially big budget movies.
Yeah, and they shared news on the D&D TV show. Some folks have been worried, well, maybe this is going to go away, but it's interesting. They say we're also doing production for things like a D&D TV series. Now, that is a cost plus model that Paramount is fully funding. So we get the production margin from that, plus like a licensing fee for being an IP owner on something like that. So it seems like it's a very low risk model. So that's good news
Mhm.
for it not being canceled or anything like that. And there were a couple of really interesting
Right.
investor questions. One of them said, basically, "Hey, you made it sound like D&D was this huge, big piece of the plan to double the Wizards' business. Is that kind of now at risk?" And the answer was, "quote I would say the underlying thesis of our D&D business was all about digital. To me, entertainment's a kicker." So, sort of saying like movies wasn't the bet, and not even addressing
Mhm.
tabletop publishing. It was video
Right.
games, and that
Mhm.
Shawn, that hit me. That hurt a bit.
Mhm.
Did you
Well,
feel that?
digital video games, but digital also D&D Beyond,
Yes, and
right?
virtual
And,
tabletop.
and right, and all of that I think is where the crux of this is resting. I think they are betting heavily that once they get a virtual tabletop going, once they get fully integrated between D&D Beyond and a virtual tabletop and the rules and
Hmm.
all of that coming together, it's going to be the best of all worlds. It's going to be the
Yeah,
best of digital entertainment, and it's going to be the best of tabletop role-playing games that will not just be, it's going to be the sum of it is going to be greater than its parts. I think that's what their hope is. Now,
yeah.
will it happen? I don't know.
Well, I liked
Will
how
it
you said the
happen in a
word.
way that is financially viable? Yeah,
Yeah, and I like how
I
you
don't
said the
know.
word betting. There's a quote here. I won't read it all
Yeah.
out, but basically what they're saying is the RPG market is 80 million people. Video game RPG players is 800 million. And I think they're
Mhm.
hoping to sort of tap into that through these plays, but I don't know that D&D Beyond and the virtual tabletop reach 800 million. Yes, the Baldur's Gate 3 game does, but those D&D Beyond the virtual tabletop may be locked into 80 million people, and it's not clear to me. I mean, the VTT has no pricing model as far as we know, and one presumes that somewhere there's at least back of the envelope calculations, I sure hope. But there's no stated pricing model, and this feels like a all like a lot of, I don't want to say it's just a lot of talk, but it lacks on details. And so we'll see how this evolves. We've already seen several evolutions just in the last 2 years around these investor calls, but very interesting. And they end with this quote. "And so I think Baldur's Gate 3 is just the first of several new digital initiatives you're going to see from us that span how we can try to transform tabletop role playing gaming to an even richer kind of theater of the mind experience to more traditional video games from us and partners like Larian."
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, if they can do that, great. It's just a matter of, show me not the money,
Yeah.
because we already know you have the money to show, right? Show me the progress, show me the themes and the mind, the mind map that you
Yeah.
have. Taking that from idea to actual product is uh where the rubber meets the road, if you will.
And nothing here says the 2024 rules are pivotal to our strategy or anything like that, right? And
Right.
and I think it was sounding like they were before, or maybe a little more part of the conversation. And I wonder sort of how that the tenor of that conversation has changed internally. Sometimes D&D is at its best when the corporates forget about it or think of it as something they might sell off and they just
Mhm.
let people do stuff. So maybe we're going to go back towards that, to where the group can just make the best games they want and not worry too much about it. But I sort
Mhm.
of don't know that that's I don't trust that's the case. I think instead that it's going to have to be, focus on the virtual tabletop, even though you're trying to make print products somehow, and that could be uncomfortable. We'll see.
Mhm. We go from the business side of things to the AI side of things. Last week we covered the AI art fiasco that came out while Gen Con was happening. And we're not going to rehash that, but Wizards of the Coast has released a statement saying that the art that was commissioned that had this AI bent to it was sent in before there was an AI policy in the contracts. So now moving forward, or even going back, there was a policy about AI. It just didn't reach far enough back for that piece. And they also said, quote, multiple members of our art team and art team leadership have personally re-reviewed each piece of art in Glory of the Giants, Deck of Many Things set, Phandelver and Below, Planescape, for potential AI art usage. No generative AI art usage beyond what has already been identified in Glory of the Giants and the Giants of the Starforge was found. So if you believe what they're saying here, that was it. Those two instances were the only two. Everything going forward will now be completely clear of AI art.
Cool.
Any thoughts there, or just
Uh,
statement and
I
we're
think
good?
it's what it has to be. I don't have any particular blame or praise for Wizards. I think these things are hard, and everybody's trying to do what they can across the industry. So that's all seems good to me in terms of trying to
Yep.
do the best they can with the situation.
Sweet. Gen Con has announced attendance record was set. More than 70,000 unique attendees in 2023, the 20th year of it being in Indianapolis. For comparison's sake, in the year 2000, where I believe it was in Milwaukee, the attendance was 20,000 people. So 50,000 more here in 2023 in a brand new city. Gen Con sold out of badges, and they've renewed the contract with the city of Indianapolis through 2030. So we're going to see Gen Con in Indy for at least, doing math in my head, 6 more years, 7 more years, depending on when 2023
Mhm.
is. Gen Con has said that the event generated almost $75 million in economic impact for Indianapolis. Gen Con 2024, August 1st through 4th. Write it down on your calendar. If you're interested in what happened in Gen Con Online, one of the patrons of our show and game designer Richard Green blogged about his experience at Gen Con Online. Not just the Baldman Games Adventures League stuff, but all of the different games he played. And so there's a link in our show notes to richardgreengames.com where you can read Richard's his review of the games that he played. Continuing with some convention news, we have Baldman Games will be running stuff D&D wise and other Hasbro WotC stuff at PAX West. Since PAX West is seeing renewed interest, Baldman Games will be there. It is September 1st through 4th, and you're going to be involved in that, Teos?
I am. I'm going to be helping to run the events there, so I hope to see some great judges there. Anybody who's listening who is interested, head to baldmangames.com/pax.-west, link in our show notes, and sign up to DM. And I think this is
There you
going to
go.
be the kind of the beachhead for future years. So this year will be more about
Mhm.
establishing, and then we'll look at really improving the show from there on. So this is just a foot in the ground. There's not a lot of time to plan. We're going to run games. That's the focus.
Mhm.
And then in the future, looking at
All
creating
right.
that better experience.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure the experience will be great with you and other West Coast DMs there to run the D&D games for the masses. Masses are playing Baldur's Gate 3 according to the play data released by Larian Studios, which has told us this player data, including this is amazing. During launch weekend, 100 or 1,225 years worth of play have taken place. A combined 88 years was just character creation, with 10% of the players spending at least an hour creating their character. 368 players have finished the game completely in 3 days. The peak concurrent player count was just shy of 1,815,000. And Half Elf was the first number one player race choice.
You
The
have to laugh
number
at that.
one choice for a class, the Paladin. Yep.
Half Elf being the number one race choice is just Wizards is like, oh.
Yeah. Hey, I'm sure that they will take the 815,000 players playing a D&D branded game.
Yes, they will.
And hopefully turning some of those into further sales down the line of various things, including books, D&D Beyond subscriptions, t-shirts, baloney, etc. We got some information about the 2024 playtest survey results. I did not watch the video, but we have gathered information from across the internet to hear what Jeremy Crawford and others have said about the results. Teos, anything stand out for you?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of things that stand out, and I think that what most folks are kind of saying is that it's a bit of a reversal on a number of things, and it's interesting to characterize that the kind of thing that interests me the most is less the details and more that the character of the playtest. I've often said I wish that they were experimenting more the way that the 5e D&D Next playtest did before 2014. And it's almost like they have acted like everything was all very sure. And then now they're reversing course on a number of things. So it's like they were play testing, trying out things, I guess, but they didn't really characterize it that way. It all felt very fixed. And so, things like these class lists that are broken up by different type of sort of being, I forget what they call them, but divine nature, arcane kind of thing, are maybe going away because they're starting to see that the playtests don't really favor that. And so they may go back to that 2014 model of spell lists and things like the wizard being the class that has the greatest access to spells. The warlock didn't test particularly well, so they're thinking of going back to the 2014 pact magic model. And there are a number of minor things they talk about, weapon mastery does really well, and that's for sure going to be in the 2024 player's handbook. Things like flex, one of the weapon mastery options, didn't score well, but they're going to tweak it and play with it and see. They believe in the math of it. It was another of those great moments where Jeremy Crawford goes, the math says it's strong, why don't people like it? It's like, well, okay, we don't always agree on these things, but you have your feedback.
Right.
And just what else? Sorcerer spells, mixed responses, the meta magic changes scored well. The thing that really grabbed my attention was the statement that there will be 3 more players handbook playtests, and then they switch to the DMG. And that always really puts it into perspective when you think, we've got 3 more times where we're going to see players handbook content to offer opinions on. Oof, that's right. That's where you feel that get real, and I feel it for the team. I feel it for the community, and then it switched to the DMG. I'm very excited about that. We're talking about this every week, and to see what are they going to share from the DMG with us, and what will it look like. I mean, that's just fascinating.
Yeah. I only read some highlights, but what I noticed was the continued theme of, and so we're reverting back to the 2014 version, and so we're reverting back to the 2000, which sort of, I think, goes to show that the game really didn't need a major revision. And what we said from the very start is, if you're trying to take advantage of the 50th anniversary, just release a 50th anniversary thing, but keep the rules basically the same. And I think we're sort of moving back toward that toward that point, with at least the specifics of the mechanics and the rules.
And that may be better for the game, because I think that, we're, I mean, 5e is so amazingly successful that altering it significantly doesn't really make sense now. But at some point, probably will, because eventually people do tire of things. There are some people who are tired now, right? But there will be many more people who are tired 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. And that's where it can really make sense to have an actual 6e at that point. And if you try to bridge it and go halfway, you may end up accomplishing neither goal. So I think the more it's like 2014, I think the better off that probably D&D is and Wizards is in the long run. But we shall see.
Mhm.
Easy for me to say.
We shall. Exactly. I am glad I am not involved in that process, because I would definitely do things wrong. But doing things right is Christian Hoffer at comicbook.com, because he got the chance to interview Jeremy Crawford and has released the first part of that interview at comicbook.com. What does he say and what does Jeremy say? Well, let's get to it. The article itself said Dungeons and Dragons does not view the recent revivals of Spelljammer, Planescape, and other campaign settings as, quote, one-shots, and plans to revisit at least some of these worlds in the future. Jeremy told Christian that setting adventures are among the most popular. Well, yes and no. Curse of Strahd seems to lead the adventure sales, and Spelljammer had strong initial sales, but Dragonlance has been one of the flowers. Lower, according to BookScan data. That's Teos there. Teos on the notes.
Yeah,
lower sellers.
Because it's so just strikes me, Shawn, this statement that some of these setting adventures are amongst the most popular. At least looking at the BookScan data, I don't quite agree with that statement. It's all over the place as to what's popular and what's not, and why, at least on the BookScan sales. Spelljammer apparently still is doing actually fairly strong, and the beginning was amazing, but you don't hear kind words for it out there. And same thing with Dragonlance, but Dragonlance has not had the strong sales. What's interesting to me is that Jeremy doesn't say, oh, you're going to find a whole different approach with Planescape. He seems to be defending them both, which suggests to me that Planescape's going to be like Spelljammer, which is what a lot of people are fearing. Because spelljamming could be covered in a way that helps DMs create their own stories, helps them populate a solar system, come up with interesting travel, have ship battles, do all of the things that are from that. Or in Dragonlance, play with no gods, discover the gods, uncover new threats. It doesn't tend to have that. Instead, it's kind of focused on that particular experience. So I don't know, it's interesting to hear Jeremy say this, and I wouldn't say that it's just one shot, but if the answer is things in the future, what will that look like, and how long do we wait?
One of the points that Jeremy makes, and I'm not going to read his quote verbatim, is that there's a couple bits of good news with this new release, and the more that the rules look like the 2014 rules, and once those rules are finalized, it means less changes need to be made So more focus can be put on these other settings, more attention can be given to it. So it's not just a one and done. Here's the source book, the monster guide, and the adventure, and that's all we're going to do. This gives them a chance to spend more time with their hired staff going back and doing those other things. And Jeremy uses the term play first approach. He says at certain times in D&D's history, it's been a read first approach, because we've had points in history where we're producing so many books each year, there was no way anyone could play all of it. In some years, it would be hard to play even a small percentage of the number of things that come out. But because we have a play first approach, we want to make sure we're coming out with things at a pace where if you really wanted to, and even that you could play everything, and even that would require a lot of weekends and evenings dedicated to D&D play. And that's what we've talked about since the start of 5e, right? Which is the slow release. While it infuriated some people, was a smart business approach, maybe accidentally, because it built a community that we're all playing the same thing, and it gave everyone a chance to fully digest everything that came out.
Yeah.
And with the rapid succession of releases within the last couple of years, that has not been the case, which is why I think sales in some cases have been a little lower on certain products.
Yeah, and I think that, if I were in this room, I would have said to Jeremy, I totally get why we don't have 40 Spelljammer products, however many Dragonlance products, 30, 50, whatever it was, something completely absurd. I'm totally down with that. But there's a difference between that. And I think it's also great. And I love the approach of saying, hey, play first, right? That Spelljammer is going to have this focused experience to it. Dragonlance, a large part of it is the adventure. But also a little bit of help towards running in those worlds, a little more help, a little better help would really be welcome, right? Is Planescape going to provide us the tools and guidance for planar adventures? Or is it going to tell us about Sigil and give us a single adventure that maybe takes us to a couple of planes? Those are two very different things. I don't need 40 Planescape adventures. We already have that, if we really want it. But just a little more of that help and also that there's a difference between the adventure and to really speak to the DM about what's awesome about these settings. And I think the products so far that we've seen could use a little more of that inspiration and establishing tools, right? That those two things could really be there.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see that once the current catalog comes out that we've been waiting on, and then the 2024 books come out, like what's the first product after that? Because I think the first product after that will tell us a lot about what their plan will be going forward.
Yeah.
And how they hope to address this issue of too much content versus putting out enough content to make it reasonable for game masters to have the content they want to play. So I am looking forward to hearing all about that. Speaking of things that are coming out that you might want to play, we've talked about Rob Schwalb's game, Shadow of the Demon Lord, over and over again on the show, including covering it in depth in one full episode. Well, now his follow-up game, Shadow of the Weird Wizard, is up on Kickstarter. You have until 6 a.m. on September 7th to back the project. I know I've backed it. I know a lot of game designers I know have reached out to their fan base and said, you really need to check this game out. I don't need to say it anymore. So it's there. Go get it. And the last bit of crowdfunding news is Aberration is a new board game coming from Ghostfire Gaming. It is Ghostfire Gaming's first board game. And we went and we got somebody who knows a little bit about board games to design this. Peter Lee. If you don't know that name, you should. He was a designer on some amazing games you might have heard of, including Lords of Waterdeep, Tyrants of the Underdark, the D&D Adventure System games. He also worked on D&D, a 5th edition D&D, D&D minis games, Magic the Gathering he worked on. So it's it's in good hands in terms of game design. What's it about? Well, it's sort of an asymmetrical player power game where you're working together, a tower defense system, but it's also got bag building and worker placement elements. It's set in the grim hollow world of Etheris in the Burok Empire, where the great beast rages through the lands, corrupting everything in its path. So you are centered in a city. The great beast has passed by, creating aberrations of all shapes, sizes, and you need to fight them. I play tested it with Peter. I really, really enjoyed it. He wrote about it at boardgamegeek.com. There's a link in the show notes. And if you want to be told when it goes live, which will be in September, you can go to gamefound.com and search for Aberration. And if you sign up now to be notified, you can get a free pin when you actually back it.
Fantastic. I can't wait for it. Peter Lee is
And
just amazing. So no, nice get on that.
yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yep, looking forward to it. And I'll talk more about it as we get closer to the fulfillment.